Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala sahbihi wa sallam. Welcome to our third segment to understanding grief and depression. In the first segment, we looked at the definition of grief and depression. And in the second segment, we discussed the symptoms and causes of depression. And in this segment, we look at the remedy. So now that we have looked at the issue of grief and depression, the important question that may arise here is, what is the remedy? The answer to this question is that the Quran and the prophetic traditions provide the remedy for all cases of grief and depression, especially those that occur as a result of external causes. This reflects Allah's mercy for His slaves. Indeed, He has made the Quran as a cure and a mercy for the believers. All they need to do is turn to Him and follow the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to attain salvation and bliss in this life and in the life to come. From the 8 remedies that the author has prescribed, we begin with the first, and that is the Muslim Creed. The Muslim Creed provides protection against as well as a sure cure for depression. We hear a lot about the Muslim Creed, yet many people do not understand its meaning, requirements, and effects. In fact, this creed has a great influence on the feelings and behavior of man. So we shall look at some of its aspects and the impact of these aspects in providing protection against as well as a sure cure for depression. So it's noteworthy that we mention, in fact, the remedy that the Quran and the prophetic traditions provide is intended for all kinds of diseases, emotional, mental disorders, or otherwise. We turn to the divine decree, Qadr. The Muslim creed in the area of divine decree prevents us from giving in to anxiety and severe grief. Imam at-Tirmidhi related on the authority of Ibn Abbas that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "And you should know that if the whole nation were to join forces in order to benefit you with something, they would not be able to benefit you except with something which Allah has decreed for you. And if they were to join forces in order to harm you, they would not harm you except with something which Allah has decreed for you." This hadith has been documented by Imam al-Albani in the Sahih Sunan at-Tirmidhi. In another narration we find, "And you should know that whatever has missed you was not to befall you, and what has befallen you was not to miss you." This tradition was documented by Imam Abu Dawood. Therefore, sisters, when we realize that everything has been decreed by Allah, we will certainly not show any signs of grief. How could we grieve when we know that no human being can do this, can do us any good or harm except with Allah's leave? Again, how can we grieve when we know that no human being can do us any good or harm except with Allah's leave? Why should we then worry and grieve, as Allah Ta'ala has mentioned when He stated, "No misfortune can happen on earth or in yourselves, but it is recorded in a book before bringing it into existence. That is truly easy for Allah. And this is done so that you don't grieve for the sake of that which has escaped you, nor will you rejoice because of that which has been given. Allah does not love those who are arrogant and boastful." We can say here that Some people become worried and restless upon losing money in a business, a wife, a husband in our case, a child, job, or social status. And if these people knew that what has befallen them has already been decreed by Allah, then they would not undergo a state of grief and restlessness, as Allah has stated again, to repeat it again, in order that you grieve, in order that you do not grieve for the sake of that which has escaped you. Again, in order that you do not grieve for the sake of that which has escaped you. Conversely, they should not rejoice because of what they have been given, nor should they rejoice because of that which they have been given. And this is true because whatever we have been given has also been decreed by Allah, Jalla wa Ala. So rejoicing may lead to conceit and arrogance. Rejoicing may lead to conceit and arrogance. As Allah has stated, Allah does not love those who are arrogant and boastful. When one avoids conceitedness because of a misfortune, one automatically becomes humble and far away from pride and arrogance. For one knows that there is a possibility of losing what one has gained one day. If one shows extreme joy when gaining it, one will certainly show extreme grief when losing it. However, if one accepts what one has got as having been decreed by Allah, one will definitely accept it with delight and balanced feelings. When one establishes a balance in one's feelings, both in times of ease and hardship, one will certainly lead a life of tranquility and stability. We now look at belief in the afterlife. The person who believes in the hereafter knows for certain that the life of this world is insignificant and transient. When one happens to lose a loved one knows that one will meet him or her in the life to come by the will of Allah. The person who believes in the hereafter knows that this present life is worthless in the sight of Allah in comparison with the afterlife. When he or she loses something in this life, then he or she does not show extreme grief, because he or she knows that the prophetic tradition in which the Prophet ﷺ said, if the life of the world were equal to a gnat's wing in the sight of Allah, He would not give a disbeliever a drink from it. The incident of the death of Ibrahim, the Prophet's son, alayhi salam, provides proof that belief in the hereafter eases grief and brings comfort to the believers. Imam al-Bukhari reported on the authority of Anas ibn Malik that when the Prophet ﷺ lost his son Ibrahim, he said, the eyes sheds tears. The eye sheds tears. The heart grieves. And we do not say that which is displeasing to the Lord. Were it not a true promise, a sure gathering on the day of judgment, and that the last of us will certainly follow the first, we would have grieved bitterly for you, O Ibrahim. We are indeed in grief for you, O Ibrahim. This was reported by Ibn Majah in the Book of Funerals. This means that were it not for his belief in the hereafter, then he, alayhi salam, would certainly have grieved bitterly for him. Belief in the hereafter, therefore, served as a protection for the Prophet alayhi salam. If our belief in the hereafter is strong enough, we will surely accept whatever happens to us, avoiding all the negative effects this may have upon us. Now we turn to belief in Allah's names and attributes as the third remedy. Some people mistakenly believe that one's belief in Allah's names and attributes is a purely abstract matter. Believing in these names and attributes, such as Allah being the King, the Wise, the Able, and the Giver. Yet these divine names and attributes do not seem to have any impact whatsoever on their lives. So in fact, they do not get any benefit from their belief whatsoever. Indeed, belief in the divine names and attributes is in no way a belief in abstract matters. On the contrary, this belief has an extremely beneficial influence on man's life. The person who believes that Allah is the King knows for sure that he has the right to give or withhold his bounties, and consequently will not object to Allah's decision and argue about them. Similarly, the person who believes that Allah is most wise, who wisely decrees things for people, whether or not one is aware of Allah's wisdom behind his decrees, will certainly accept whatever happens to him. This is so because he knows that whatever has happened must only be good for him. At first, he or she might not be aware of the wisdom or a part of it behind this happening, but later he or she could well become aware of it or part of it. There are many examples in the Quran to this effect. Surah Al-Kahf, and Surah Al-Kahf cites the story of Al-Khidr with Moses alayhim salam. At one point in the story, Moses became horrified when Al-Khidr killed a young man, saying to him, "Have you slain an innocent person who had slain none? Verily you have done a horrible thing." Al-Khidr explained to him the reason behind the killing afterwards. Thus, it was stated, "As for the youth, his parents were believers, and we feared lest he should oppress them by rebellion and disbelief, and we desired that their Lord would give them in exchange a better in purity," meaning a better son in purity, "and nearer to mercy." What Moses understood from Khidr's killing of the young man was that this was a great calamity for the youth's parents. Had their parents witnessed the killing of their own son, they would certainly have thought as Moses did. Because the youth's parents were believers whom Allah loved, Allah has shown his mercy towards them by having Al-Khidr kill him. I remember at this point a number of true stories which show Allah's wisdom behind certain events that people initially thought were calamities, but later they realized that what had actually happened was in fact a blessing from Allah. And then the author said, we cite the following two stories as an example. The first occurred in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia in 1979 when a passenger aircraft burst into flames and 301 people perished. I witnessed this disastrous incident. One of the survivors of the tragedy who worked in a psychiatric clinic in Riyadh later reported, "I, as planning to travel on the same flight, when I got to the airport and parked my car in the car park, I realized that I had locked the car door with the key still in the ignition. I spent some time trying to find a way to open the car door to get the key and was rather worried lest I should miss my flight. But when I finally managed to get it, I made my way to the passenger hall only to find out that my plane had already taken off. I thank God for granting me a new life." And this second story happened to another person who was supposed to go on the same flight. After having taken the boarding pass, he went to the waiting room and took a seat there. No sooner had he done so than he was overcome by sleep. The flight was announced on the loudspeaker, yet he failed to hear it at all. When he eventually woke up, he realized that he had missed the flight. He was so upset and frustrated that he had an argument with the flight officer. But a quarter of an hour later, the aircraft crashed The aircraft crash landed and burst into flames. So he watched the burning aircraft with disbelief. Bearing these and similar stories in mind, when something escapes you for a reason, you're not aware of it, be it a flight you have missed, a job, property, or anything else, you should remember that what has befallen you has been justly and wisely decreed by Allah. You should remember your belief in Allah's names and attributes by acting in such a contemplative manner. So we've mentioned 3 aspects from the Muslim creed, sisters, and in the next segments we will continue, inshallah. Anything that was stated in this segment that was true and correct was certainly from Allah, and anything that was incorrect was from myself. And I ask Allah for forgiveness for that. Ameen. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Exalted are you, O Allah, and all praises for you. I bear witness that there is no true God except you. I ask for your forgiveness, and I turn in repentance to you. Ameen.